Welcome to the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, a series of educational podcasts that showcase the connection between human capabilities and good work design, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia. Hello and welcome to the HFE Hub. I'm Sharon Todd and today I'm chatting with Adam Scott. Adam Scott is the Director of Cardiac Services at the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital. He's passionate about creating solutions for problems in the health sector that have previously not been able to be solved. In doing so, he has created a robotic ultrasound solution to enable patients in regional and rural areas to access same-day ultrasound procedures. Adam wishes to declare that he is the director of RMI Oceania, which is the company that has developed the robotic ultrasound solution. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today, Adam, and thank you so much for joining me. I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Thanks, Sharon. Really happy to be talking to you today. This is an area that's been a focus for a long period of time, and you've actually put words to what it is around human factors and ergonomics. I'm a cardiac scientist or cardiac physiologist, as we're known in different areas around the country. And basically what we do is the cardiac investigations on patients to assess whether they've got any cardiac disease. And we do that through a variety of means, through electrocardiography, where we put electrodes on the chest to look at the electrical activity of the heart muscle. And we might do that for a 10-second recording or a 24-hour recording or during a stress test, where we put patients on treadmills so that they walk on a treadmill and elevate their heart rate so we can see if they've got any narrowings in their coronary arteries, through to more invasive procedures such as our cardiologists perform coronary angiograms, where we put a catheter in the femoral artery and run it up to release dye into the coronary arteries and identify blockages, of which they then blow up balloons or put stents in the coronary arteries, through to 3D mapping of the heart called electrophysiology to look at whether people have extra pathways conducting electricity, causing rhythms that are not very good for people, put it simply, and then putting cardiac devices in patients and programming them. So cardiologists, again, will put the device in, and the cardiac scientist, physiologist will program the device to make sure that so things like pacemakers and defibrillators, so that the patient can be supported when they have very low heart rates or very fast heart rates, right through to cardiac ultrasound, where we use an ultrasound probe to look at the function and structure of the heart to see if there's any abnormalities. And all of those cardiac investigations have a report which we conduct, so that then a cardiologist can decide what's the next course of treatment in that process for patients.
So then how did you become interested in human factors and ergonomics?
I'm really big on looking after our staff, and I want our staff to get in the car driving to work in the morning and go, I'm really excited about going to work because it's a good work environment. The people are fun. The work we do is productive. We're helping patients, and I feel supported in performing my role. And so if we have staff doing procedures and it's causing injury or it's not functional, we a lot of the time in health, we just do workarounds to adapt to it, to try and find a way so that we can get the procedure done. And so we've constantly been looking at various, staff sitting down all day reporting 24-hour Holter monitor is not conducive to good, it's good ergonomics sitting at a computer, but sitting down all day is not good for the body. And so other aspects such as our sonographers, our cardiac sonographers do an ultrasound of a patient's chest and looking at the heart muscle. And this has been an area which has been a big problem globally, whether you're a cardiac sonographer or a general sonographer. I'll just talk about cardiac, where there is an immense injury burden in this space.
So do you want to tell me what that injury burden is?
Well, our sonographers conduct a scan called an echocardiogram, and that's where they sit on the edge of the patient's bed or sit beside the patient's bed and either with their right arm or left arm or left hand or right hand hold a probe to put on the patient's chest and have sustained, long, static held poses to acquire the image. And so those poses, whether it be holding left-handed where they're pushing away from their body, they get wrist, elbow, shoulder, neck strain and injuries. And if you're right-handed leaning over a patient, and in this day and age, we're tending to see a lot more bariatric patients, so patients that are overweight. And so as a result, patients have to sonographers have to stretch further over the patient to be able to conduct the scan. And so when they're leaning over the patient, they're pulling the probe back into the patient's chest, and they hold it for sustained periods and do very small movements to adjust the angle of the probe to acquire the image. And with their left hand, they are operating an ultrasound machine. And so what happens is, because they have these long sustained periods holding the probe, they get wrist, elbow, shoulder, back, hip, neck injuries. And it's been a big problem for a long period of time. We've done an immense amount of work with our sonographers in trying to support them in limiting the number of scans they do a day and the length of time. So a normal scan can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes of those sustained pressures. And so patients are generally booked on the hour. So they've got an hour to get the image results, report and analyze the scan, and then have a quick stretch to be able to be ready for the next patient. So we've done a lot of work. We recognize that globally, in the world of sonography, 85 to 90% of sonographers are currently working in pain, and 20% of sonographers experience a career-ending injury, which, when you're a junior staff member entering the world of sonography and seeing sonographers who are 10 years into their career, limiting the number of days they can scan, the number of hours they can scan, it's a pretty scary prospect, knowing that they're on that trajectory. So we've done a lot around supporting our sonographers by limiting the number of scans they can do, cross-training them in different areas of cardiac investigation, so that they might scan in the morning and they might be in the cath lab in the afternoon, or stress testing the next morning and halter, so that they can sustain the volume of the scans that they're doing. But also identifying, if we have very large bariatric patients, we might roster 2 sonographers to be able to do the scan. So one will operate the machine, the other will do the scan, and then they rotate during the scan. So they're not holding these long sustained pressures. And then right through to encourage them to get into strength and conditioning programs outside of work to stretch in between scans, so that we can increase their longevity in the field, because we know that there is long-term disability from sonography. We see a lot of sonographers after 10 years having to change career paths because they can no longer scan due to injury. And this results in a shortage of sonographers worldwide. So when we talk about someone who's been doing a procedure or an investigation for 10 years, they are highly skilled, exceptional staff. And we say they've got this great echo IQ, so this echocardiography IQ, which we want to keep within our department to teach other students, other staff members, other registrars, to be able to maintain it. But after 10 years, when they leave due to injury, or they have to go down a different career path, we lose that echo IQ. And so it is a constant hyper-awareness around recruiting these people and supporting them early days.
So the rotation of tasks and breaking things up, as you've discussed, is obviously one of the first base things that ergonomics and human factors usually talks about. But I believe you're doing some amazing work with Cobot. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about that. Firstly, what is a Cobot?
Yeah, so I might take you back a step in the journey of how we got to operating with a Cobot. But basically, you live in a metropolitan location. You have ready, easy access to all health services. However, if you live in a rural location like Longreach or Bullia or Winton, the populations are much smaller. So when we talk about that region in central west and northwest Queensland, which is 1,000 kilometres away, it's a huge landmass. So it's 700,000 square kilometres. So to put that into contrast, that landmass of central west Queensland and northwest Queensland, 700,000 square kilometres, is the same size as France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and half of Switzerland. And that, when you look at that, you go, "Whoa, that's a lot of area in Europe." It's actually just a small component of Queensland. And so when you look at that area in France and Europe, that's 83 million people in those locations. Whereas when we look at that northwest, central west area of Queensland, it's 44,000 people. So it's the equivalent of the Faroe Islands or the Marshall Islands in Oceania, which is, these are tiny little islands. And so when you look at that large landmass, it's very challenging to deliver health services on scale to such a large landmass with such a very small population. And so back in 2016, we went on a listening tour to understand how our rural partners were conducting their cardiac investigations and how we could help and support them to be able to provide these services. And what they identified was that their ability to provide daily services is non-existent. So they might run a service such as exercise stress testing once a month on a Thursday afternoon where they would do 3 patients. So if you're the 8th patient to present to the GP in that town and you're required to have a stress test, you're waiting months. And so what we found when we looked into this, that it was on average 5 months for a patient to present to a GP, have the procedure done, have it reported, and have the result go back to the GP. And these are basic cardiac investigations like stress testing or Holter monitoring. It was on average 5 months. And I thought to myself, this is crazy. If my parents lived there, I'd be pretty upset that they couldn't access, the care we can access in Brisbane. Now, my parents don't live there, but someone else's parents do. And I thought, right, well, we've got the willingness to look and support these areas. And so we sat down with Longreach Hospital in the first instance to listen to what their complexities were, what their resourcing was, and what they wanted to do. And our team here came up with, we sat down and went, what are all the solutions we can offer to this hospital? And we laid them all out. And we said to them, you choose how you want these services to be delivered and functional rather than us telling you what you'll have. So it was very much a collaborative approach in building a customized model. And so where we went with this was we created the ability that we wanted to remove the barriers. So we wanted to be able to provide same-day access. So if you present, like you do in Brisbane, to a doctor, you can get access to a specialised area that day or the next day. But you also get the report as soon as your test is done. And so we wanted, and also, you don't have to travel that far. You live in Brisbane, you drive 5 kilometres and you're at the GP or even less. And so we wanted to remove that we wanted to give same-day access, same-day reporting, and remove that travel burden. And so to be able to do that, traditionally, we've flown staff to these locations intermittently, once every 3 months, once every 6 months, once a year, to provide some base-level services to be able to support these areas. Now, we know flying people is very, very expensive, and there are huge gaps in time in getting staff back there to be able to support these patients. So what we did was we created a tele-cardiac investigations program, and this is where we set up the ability for the specialists, so the cardiac scientists sitting in Brisbane, to be able to remote control operate the stress testing or Holter monitoring or ECG equipment in the rural facilities such as Longreach. So that way we could have a cardiac scientist and a cardiology registrar sitting in and watching the stress test being conducted at Longreach, and if necessary, being able to take over and remote control operate that equipment so that patient could get that test done. They can then direct entry report into that stress testing system to report the activity, and then electronically sign it out, print it off. That local treating team has a cardiology signed report within 7 minutes of that test completing, and it's then uploaded to the statewide viewer, so every GP can have access to those results. And so this transformed these rural locations' access to healthcare. So now they're able to access same-day services, reporting within 7 minutes for stress testing, and same-day reporting for Holter monitoring, ECG, blood pressure monitoring, event monitoring. And so we're providing that to 28 facilities in rural and regional Queensland, which is fantastic. Now, one of the big things which everybody wants access to is cardiac ultrasound, echocardiography. And traditionally, that has only been able to be delivered by flying a sonographer and a cardiologist and an ultrasound machine out to a rural location to be able to conduct that scan manually. And then they come back at the end of that outreach visit, whether it be 2 days or 3 days or 4 or 5 days, report those scans and then upload them. And so the ability to do same day or large volume is very, very small. And so when we identified that we can remote control operate stress testing equipment, we started to look at how we could transform the traditional way of doing an ultrasound, but doing it via telehealth. And so that brings us back to our injury issue as well, about how do we still use all the image acquisition skills and analytical skills of a sonographer, yet completely remove their injury risk. And so what we don't want to do is we don't want to change the process of ultrasound, just the process of obtaining the images by removing the muscles and having to hold these static and uncomfortable positions. And that's where we identified the capability of using a robot to be able, a robotic arm, to be able to remote control the robotic arm to be able to conduct an ultrasound. So a sonographer is still very much required. They're still driving the equipment. They're still acquiring the images. They're still analysing the images. They're just not using their arm to hold the probe. And so when we talk about a Cobot is a collaborative robot. So it's basically where a human operator controls and remotely operates for image acquisition.
So how do we get the robot out there? Obviously, we send the robot out there. So the equipment's in the areas where these scans need to be done, obviously.
Where we're at the moment. So we have... we're conducting 2 clinical trials currently, but based off 2 other research projects where we've done some early testing on utilising this Cobot to be able to remote control operate the arm to conduct a scan. And the early evidence is really positive. We're really excited about the capability. We're now going through these 2 other clinical trials to validate and verify that the image quality and the pathologies that we acquire manually can be acquired with the robotic arm. So the potential of it in future could be really advantageous, not just to sonographers in a room to minimise their injury risk, where they won't need to hold the probe to acquire the image. They can use this Cobot to be able to acquire the image. And that way they're able to completely de-risk themselves, and their injuries will be in their thumbs from remote using an operator to be able to control the robot. And that's a whole other aspect that we do need to factor in and take into consideration. But the other benefit is, yes, you can have a robot out at Longreach and a sonographer here in Brisbane, and they can remote control operate that robot to be able to acquire those images. And that's where we're at currently with these 2 clinical trials to assess that capability and validate that this can be done.
So when we've got these Cobots out in these areas and they're being remotely operated, what are some of the problems that you may experience with that system?
First up is when we do them via telehealth, that remote capability is making sure we have the appropriate infrastructure from an IT perspective. So being able to remove those slow latency speeds so that when we ask the robot to move pan left, it does it straight away, rather than you press the button and 5 seconds later it slowly moves. We need that real-time speed. So that's part of the whole process. It's not just having a robot and going, yeah, it can do this. It's about making sure that the infrastructure and capability and the speeds are in place so that when we ask it to do what we need it to do, it does it in a responsive time frame so that we can acquire those images. Because we don't want to extend, we want to be able to basically, instead of having a person out there scanning manually, is to have a robot out there which the sonographer is using, but it takes the same time frame. And it's not causing any undue pressure or stress to the patient or the sonographer. It just becomes part of their normal process, like what happens when they scan manually. So from an in-room perspective, when we're reducing injury, the robot is bedside beside the patient, and so is the sonographer. So they're sitting there chatting with the patient as per normal, reaching up and controlling the ultrasound machine. So that IT infrastructure isn't as great because you can operate that. You just need power basically, and the computer system within the robot to be operational so that you can tell it what to do and it does what you need to when you ask it. But one of the other aspects that we don't think about is a change process. So we know a lot in healthcare, we tend to keep doing what we've always done and we keep getting the same result. And in some cases, that's perfectly fine. But in other cases, we very much need to go down a value-based healthcare approach to work out what is some of the low-value care we can stop doing or remove to reinvest that into higher value care. And sometimes that stopping a process is harder than starting a new process. We tend to think of all the great ideas and new ways of doing things, and so we start doing those, but we don't turn off other aspects to enable those things to keep moving and progressing. And so we end up with a very busy program or a number of different processes, which some are obsolete and need to be turned off. But because we've always done them, we keep doing them because that's traditionally how we've done. So there's a whole piece of work around educating and communicating and collaborating with multiple layers of, other sonographers, executive leadership, industry partners around how we use this technology and why we're using it and where we're using it and the benefits and aspects, showing the evidence and showing the validation that it's comparable and that it does work or doesn't work in some aspects, because learning how things do work and function really well is just as important as understanding what doesn't work and it isn't working, so that you can either turn it off or adjust it so that you can bring it into that working folder. So there's a whole raft of work when implementing new programs or projects or pieces of equipment or models of care. There's a whole communication process and change process to bring people along on that journey, because we know everybody progresses at different speeds and different rates and speaks different languages. And so it's about communicating in their dialect at their speed to help them understand, because I know I'm very energetic and I speak very fast. And for some people, that works really well. They get it. They speak my language and my speed. But for other people, it completely doesn't communicate at all. What I say doesn't work. And I have to recognize that I need to slow down and I need to communicate in a way that they understand, so that we're both speaking the same dialect and the same language. And that's been challenging. And I've learned a lot over the last 20 years about when to speed up and when to slow down, because as we know, speed kills. And sometimes when you go too fast with a process and you don't bring people along in that journey, then it's a rate limiting step. And so that, change and communication and collaboration is absolutely critical when implementing new models of care, new equipment, new processes.
What's been some of the feedback from the sonographers working in these areas or clinics working in these areas where you've implemented the Cobot?
So again, it comes back to the piece of work, the previous research we've done has been very contained, mainly because they're around intellectual property and certain components that can't be communicated about. And so we had a small contingent of sonographers involved in that early research. Other sonographers who weren't involved were curious because they were aware work was going on. And so, and when you don't communicate, when you aren't able to communicate the full story and the full picture, then people make perceptions of what is occurring, or no, that will never work. That'll never, that doesn't, no, without giving the full picture of actually have a look at this. This does what it's worked. So what we've experienced along this journey is we've had that where we've had people that are very enthusiastic and positive going, whoa, this is incredible. And we see it a lot with the Europeans and the US, where they are very excited and eager because they know new technologies and innovation is the future, and we are very rapidly moving into the future every single day. And it's either you are an early adopter and part of the transition and learning process, or you get dragged kicking and screaming along. And so what we've recognized is, while we speak very coherently and collaboratively with those early adopters, we also recognize the non-early adopters. We've got to work out how to communicate with them about and understanding what their concerns are. And things like, oh, the robots will take over our jobs, we won't have jobs. And this collaborative robot, it's explaining it's not a robot that's acting independently of itself, thinking and doing what it wants. It is a collaborative robot where you need a human sonographer, an operator, to remote control operate it. So you will always need the sonographer. You will always need their image acquisition skills and their analytical skills, and informing them of that and communicating with them about that, so that there's great understanding that this is sonography is not going to disappear and jobs aren't going to disappear. It's actually going to create more jobs because we're going to have the ability to do scans in a greater number of locations, which we're going to need more sonographers to be able to do, but we're going to be able to preserve their lifespan by reducing that injury impact. So it's very much, I'm not a marketing or PR person, and I work in a clinical environment, but recognise we need to be speaking with our comms people about how do we communicate this so that we're not leaving people behind. People are engaged, they are informed, questions can be answered the way that they would like to understand and hear it, rather than me speaking too fast with too much energy and they check out.
So in terms of barriers, clearly some regional areas have very limited internet, and realistically you're going to need fairly good internet, I'd imagine, for this to work. Am I correct in thinking that? And then if that's the case, how do you manage some of those areas where there's very limited coverage?
Queensland Health have a fantastic IT infrastructure. So we can go to any Queensland Health facility, and we've tested all of the latency speeds within every single Queensland Health facility to look at that, to be able to go, at Winton, which is a very rural and remote location in central West Queensland, where we would think, they don't have great internet speeds, but because of the Queensland Health infrastructure, they do. They have the same speeds that a tertiary facility has. For those very, very remote locations, we have tested it with Starlink, and Starlink has shown that we can actually have a robot and Starlink. You could fly into a dirt track that literally just has a power point or a generator, plug into the generator, Starlink activates, and we can do a scan, and the latency speeds, there is no dropout. And so this is where, the ideas we were having 10, 15 years ago, and I've been thinking about this robot since 2008 when one of my staff members was injured, and I'm just thinking, this is crazy. Why are we asking these staff to do these sustained static poses? But back then there wasn't the IT infrastructure, there wasn't the innovation, there wasn't the technology to be able to support it. But now, in 2024, we have these technologies and we have these platforms and these infrastructures that can completely do all those blue sky dreams that we had 10 years ago. They are fully able to be conducted and done now. And what I've learned is you can't do it alone. So you can come up with an idea, but you need not just a whole team of clinicians, but you need an IT team, you need a comms team, you need a PR team, you need a liaison team. You need, we do a lot of listening to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to listen and understand what their complexities are and their resources, but how they want services delivered. And traditionally, we've just always done what we've always done, but now we're able to restructure and build models of care and programs and platforms around what these communities want, when they want it, where they want it, how they want it, because technology is so rapidly advancing that, even though I'm playing at the pointy end, I still think, keep saying, to speak to my teams and all my people, what else don't we know? What are our gaps that we are completely unaware of just because we don't cross paths with that? We need to bring other people into this equation to fill those gaps, to inform us so that we can do it as a team, because at the end of the day, we're only as functional as our people in our team. And our team is so big and broad and vast. And so we're constantly looking about who else we can bring in to play with, who else we can collaborate with. And there are a lot of willing other locations in Queensland who are like, we want a robot, we want to play. We've got this issue, we want to scan bariatric patients in room, which is fantastic. When we look at what we can do from a pediatric perspective, which we've not even scratched the surface of, but we have Queensland Children's Hospital, which provide paediatric services to the whole state. They're one hospital, one facility with one group of staff that have to fly in and fly out everywhere. But the ability for them to be able to stay local and be able to conduct those scans using a robot will increase their capability, but also give same-day access to these paediatric services. The same with our First Nations communities about let's not make our people in rural locations travel. Let's not make them drive past their local health facility to have to drive another 200 kilometres to another facility to get access to care. Let's give it to them locally so that there is no urban-rural disparity. It is a seamless pathway where we collaborate together with multiple health jurisdictions and disciplines to be able to give people what they need when they need it.
It's fascinating, and I can only sort of think of the positives really implementing this. And really, in some ways, obviously, we're talking about cobots and sonography, but this surely must open up opportunities in many other areas. And I'm wondering, what's next?
I keep my brain focused on the task at hand at the moment, because as soon as we start making progress, I start looking at other avenues and other aspects. And I've done this, my whole life in the respect of 13 years ago. I had a lot of friends and family suffering from mental health issues. And so recognised there was a gap in services and how we provide services, and created a charity called the White Cloud Foundation. And today we have a Tele-Mental Health service where anyone in Queensland can access mental health services regardless of where they live. There are no barriers. So you don't need a diagnosis, you don't need a referral. It's free and you don't have to travel. You pick up a phone and our team of psychologists, social workers, dietitians, ex-physiologists, mental health nurses, counsellors will wrap themselves around that individual. Or if you're a mum or a dad or a friend worried about someone, you can ring the service and get the strategies and support to help that individual. And we've been able to turn that service on so that every Queenslander, anywhere in the state, can access this service Monday to Friday between 8 and 5. And so learning, about, this whole program started with, ergonomics and how we can support our staff and better help them back in 2008. And it opened up areas of my brain to go, we need to think laterally. We need to think of different ways. We need to be curious and not, find the 15 reasons why you shouldn't do something, but find the one why you should and unpack that. And don't let the negative outweigh the potential positive. And so, I'm really big on uniting the clans and bringing the right people and the right teams and the willing together to be able to develop these programs and pieces of work together. And so, it's my colleague in sleep sciences here at the Royal came and invited him over to have a look at our telecardiac investigations program. And he's been in sleep sciences for a very long time. And he turned around and just went, oh my goodness, and went on to create a tele-sleep program. Just by having seen that telecardiac investigations program and how it's conducted, he immediately then went, we could replicate this. And so this is what really excites me, is this Cobot technology is really exciting about its potential, and the early evidence is really positive. We've still got a lot of work to go before it becomes the polished, finished product. But when other people see it, it may ignite that area of their brain of curiosity to go, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I can apply that to my area in health and can develop a new innovative model of care or technology to be able to expand what we're doing everywhere in health.
It sounds absolutely fantastic. And not only is it reducing injury for your sonographers, but given that cardiac conditions are serious conditions in patients, I imagine that the patients are equally as thrilled, and GPs in the area. So what's sort of some of the feedback that you've had from patients?
So the early discussions we've had with our patients and the surveys we've done where we've conducted the robot, what's really interesting is that when we do a scan on a patient manually, we have to apply pressure to the probe to the patient's chest as a feedback mechanism to know in your brain, I know the probe is on the patient's chest and I know it's on that rib because I can feel it sliding over that rib. With the robot, they don't need that pressure feedback. So we have a force sensor on the robot which tells the sonographer how hard they're pressing. So it normally a manual scan is applied with a force anywhere between 4 and 20 kilos. And so with the robot, what we in our early testing that we identified was you actually don't need to provide anywhere near the volume of manual pressure using the robot. And so it's programmed to never push more than 5 kilos of pressure to the patient's chest. So, and quite often it might be 1 kilo of pressure. So as the probe with the robot touches the skin, with everybody, whether it's manually or the robot, an image is acquired. But normally the manual way, they'd push harder to know that they're on the chest and they're staying on the chest. So that's where that pressure is sustained and maintained. Whereas with the Cobot, it touches the patient's skin and image is acquired. It doesn't need to push any further at that moment. So they just need to maneuver the probe to be able to acquire the image. And so quite often, for example, when have been a volunteer and they've scanned myself, I'll be lying there and the probe will be on the skin. And after 10, 15 minutes, I'm like, have we started yet? Thinking, because there's no pressure, I'm not feeling this digging in my chest. And they'll say, oh, we're halfway done. And it's because the probe can just gently touch the skin. And the sonographers say it's from that perspective, it's quite good because they can get the probe into the position they want, put the controller down and clip all the images and do all the measurements that they require on their ultrasound machine. Whereas manually, they have to maintain that probe and it slips and they've got to hold it up. So they've got to push more pressure to stop it. You know, as you can imagine, pushing a probe against a slippery wall, and your arm will slide down the wall. So you keep pushing the pressure on to maintain that probe pressure on the wall. The same on the chest is it does slip away. And so they've constantly got to keep pushing that pressure. So from a patient perspective, they love that there's not as much pressure applied to the chest wall as what a manual scan has done. With our patients, when we talk to them about the telecardiac investigations program and being able to see their GP at 10 a.m. in the morning and at 1 p.m. to do a stress test, and if we find significant positive results from that stress test, which means they have significant signs of cardiovascular disease, in certain instances, we've had patients present to the GP at 10 a.m. They're having the stress test at 1 p.m. They're on a care flight back into Brisbane at 3 p.m. and they're having an angiogram at 6 p.m. or an echo at 6 p.m. And in some cases, that patient the next day is having quadruple bypass. And then 2 weeks later, they recover, they get sent back home, and then all of their future health appointments are done via telehealth. So that ability to have that same day support, that specialist support at the time when they need it, because traditionally, they would have had to wait a very long period of time. And if you've got to wait long periods for things, I know I don't like to wait. So if they say to me, oh, you've got to wait 3 months, Adam, you've ordered this product, it's going to arrive in 3 months, I'll go, don't worry, I'll get it elsewhere, or I won't get it. And traditionally, that's what's happened in rural and remote, regional and rural locations is because there's that, they have a 25% higher morbidity mortality due to that reduced access to that primary healthcare to get those investigations done early. So as a result, they get detected, their cardiovascular disease gets detected later in their cardiac journey. And as a result, quite often, they don't get the investigation done or it's very delayed. And so what we see in those rural locations is populations have a lifespan 7 years lower compared to metropolitan locations. So what we've been able to do is completely remove that urban-rural disparity by using technology to be able to deliver these services. So the patients, love in these rural locations. This is why we say we work with the willing. These rural locations like Longreach Hospital, Mount Isa, they are fantastic because we come up with an idea and a new model of care. We communicate with them. We build the model. We test it with them. They are so willing to adopt new technologies and new models of care and doing things differently because they want to be able to provide the best possible patient care to their patients. And if they've got to do things differently, then their adaptability and willingness and agility is outstanding. I can't speak highly enough of our Western corridor of Queensland in adopting those new technologies and being willing to participate.
Yes, a participative approach and a user-centered design approach is what you've used, and that's clearly showing in the outcome, isn't it?
Very much. And every time we get a new site, a new health facility, a new health executive that would like to discuss our program and enabling access for their facility to access it, it is a customised approach every single time. It is not a one-size-fits-all. In our tertiary hospital, we do it this way, so you must do it this way, without understanding, actually, they don't have anywhere near the resources to be able to do what we do out there. So we listen to them. We actively hear what they're saying and what their problems are. We don't tell them, okay, well, you do it this way. We put all the solutions out on a table and say, this is all the different ways we can do it. What would be the best fit for you, knowing your population? And quite often they're quite astounded in that we're not telling them what to do and how to do it, because that's what they've always had. And now they're going, this is great. So when we communicate, we say, this is your cardiology program. We just facilitate enabling it to happen. You're the rock stars. We're just in the pipeline helping you get the results that you need to treat these patients and working together to get that patient rapidly access to their tertiary referral centre. So it is very much a listening and hearing what their complexities or resources are or aren't, and then working in that facilitatory process to enable the procedures to be done under the correct guidelines, using the right models of care in their resourced facility.
The HFESA conference this year will be held in Brisbane from November the 25th to the 27th. So don't forget to log on to the website now for more information at hfesa.au. Thanks for joining us at the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia, where human-centred design really matters. If you like this podcast, make us your favourite in your podcast app. We look forward to chatting with you next time.